Hello everybody, thank you very much for joining me for another Alfred Hitchcock Presents review. Today I will be talking about Season 4, Episode 4, The Crooked Road, starring Richard Kiley, Walter Matthau, and Patricia Breslin. And The Crooked Road, I would say, is probably a series classic. It's a very memorable and just very good episode. Very interesting to watch all the way through. I would say the episode could have been even better had the ending been handled just a little bit differently, but I will get to that. Overall, I do feel like The Crooked Road is a very good episode. So we start with a couple, a Mr. Harry Addams and his wife, Mrs. Addams, and they're driving along a road, and they come across a police car, and they decide to pass the car. So at this point, they hear a siren behind them. They wind up getting pulled over. Actually, they get run off the road by the police car, and an officer approaches the car and asks the couple, Harry, for his license. And they chat. The officer says he was going over the speed limit, but Harry tries to explain his side of the story, but the officer won't listen. It's also notable that Mrs. Addams tries to get involved, and the officer basically tells her to mind her own business in not a very nice way, which makes Harry even more angry. That's pretty much the setup for the episode. I thought it was pretty good. So at this point, Harry's supposed to follow back to town, but his tire is messed up. So then there's an argument between he and the officer over whether the car is safe to drive or not. Harry insists he can just use the spare. The officer says it won't work. So a tow truck just conveniently happens to come by at this point, and you can pretty much figure out now that this is all a setup. So, of course, the tow truck driver backs the officer and says the car needs to be towed. So Harry accuses the driver of being in on this whole thing, and the police basically setting all this up. The officer actually hits Harry pretty hard at this point. So at this point, we go to the next scene, and the officer brings the Addams couple to a judge. I think we can all tell where this is going. So Harry tells his story. The officer tells his story. Of course, the judge pretty much sides with the officer, who actually hits Harry again pretty hard, I have to say, but the judge lets this go pretty much. So at first, Harry pleads not guilty, but the judge tells him he'll have to wait until Friday to get a hearing. So this, of course, forces Harry to change his plea to guilty and to pay a very large court fine, especially for the time when this series was made. So at this point, Harry and the officer chat outside, and Harry makes it clear he knows what's going on here. He doesn't back down, which I thought was interesting from the officer at all. But he's basically on his way. He goes to pick up his car, where he has to pay yet more money to get it back. And he also pretty much insults the tow truck driver, which I thought was pretty satisfying. I did like the way Harry didn't back down from any of this. It was also interesting how Mrs. Addams would always play the voice of reason and try and calm her husband down. And this was done very subtly and in the background, and I kind of liked that about her character. And it is important to the end of the episode coming up here. So the Addams finally leave town. They're chatting in their car, and it turns out that this whole time Mrs. Addams was recording all this, and it turns out that Harry and his wife work for the Highway Commission, and they have all this recorded on tape, so they have evidence of all the things that were going on in this town, where they were stopped and treated the way they were. So kind of a fitting ending for the episode, kind of justice, I guess you could say. Now, my issue with this ending is that I did think it was a little bit abrupt and a little bit rushed, and also kind of came out of nowhere. There weren't really a lot of hints throughout the episode, but if you can just kind of accept that, it's still a fitting ending to a very solid episode. The acting is really strong by Richard Kiley, Walter Matthau, and Patricia Breslin. I thought they were all excellent in their roles, and the episode flows along pretty well and is very interesting. And it's also interesting subject matter that was tackled by Alfred Hitchcock Presents when you consider the time that this episode, The Crooked Road, was made. So overall, I do recommend The Crooked Road, and I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. I do think this is a must-see episode for fans of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. It's a very interesting episode and very well done. So 4 out of 5 for The Crooked Road, and as always, thank you very much for watching.